Yowzlinger, my name is Coca-Cola34. I'm here today to do another prehistoric subject files, and today we are going to do the basilosaurid whale known as Dorudon. Now, Dorudon means spear tooth, and it was a basilosaurid whale, which meant it was, very closely related to Basilosaurus. It lived around 40.4 million years to 33.9 million years ago in the late Eocene. Maximum lengths go to the largest of adults, which can be up to 5 meters or 16 feet, and it would have actually lived in the Tethys, which is an ancient sea that doesn't exist anymore right now. And these areas would have included Egypt, the Western Sahara, North America, Pakistan, and New Zealand. And its diet has been consistent with basically mollusks and fish, and maybe even small reptiles, small amphibians, and just anything it could get its jaws on. Okay, so now we're going to go through the history, and to be honest, bear with me because it's a very confusing history. So, it was described, the first species, which was known as Dorudon serratus, or serratus if you want to pronounce it that way, was described in 1845 by Gibbs, and Gibbs described it from a fragmentary maxilla and teeth that he found in South Carolina. So this is the North American species, which is obviously Dorudon serratus or serratus. Gibbs concluded that the animal was a mammal due to the two-rooted teeth that it had, and he also concluded that it may have been a juvenile due to the teeth being very hollow. He also noted that Dorudon serratus had similarities to Zygolodon, which was at the time the name for Basilosaurus. Gibbs would actually realise that he's possibly found a actual juvenile Zygolodon instead of a Dorudon, so he proposed that the Dorudon specimen was actually a juvenile of what was known as Basilosaurus at the time, which was known as Zygolodon. However, later on down the line, a professor at Harvard known as Louis Agassiz actually concluded that the teeth were not from a juvenile of a Zygolodon, nor was it from a Zygolodon at all. It was in fact from its own genus, which was known as Dorudon serratus. So he reinstated the genus and species of Dorudon serratus. Alright, so the next part of the history is a bit weird, but I'm going to tell you anyway because it is relevant. In 1906, Andrews, who was a professor, actually proposed that Pro-Zygolodon atrox from a nearly complete skull and dentary and 3 vertebrae they actually found. Then, in 1936, Kellogg, who was obviously another professor, placed Pro-Zygolodon atrox in Zygolodon isis, as he proposed that these specimens of Pro-Zygolodon atrox were actually just juvenile morphs of the larger Zygolodon isis. Then Kellogg actually then changed Zygolodon to Pro-Zygolodon and combined the assigned Zygolodon specimens into Pro-Zygolodon, and many further specimens referred to as Pro-Zygolodon were then assigned to not as juvenile morphs, were actually seen as adult morphs from that history. Then Kellogg then actually places Zygolodon ursaris, Zygolodon ziltelli, Zygolodon elliott-smithii, and Zygolodon sensitivus into the genus of Dorudon. And then, later, a guy called Guy Rich actually placed all 4 species into something called Saghestus ursus. Now, so far, Dorudon is currently assigned as a valid genus, and the current status was actually done by a revision by someone called, I'm probably going to butcher this, but Uen, and he revised the actual genus and the species known as Dorudon atrox, which he assigned to the genus, by actually analysing various parts and various materials that were so far found. And so far, he assigned Dorudon atrox to Egypt, and it was based on Andrew's skull, lower jaw, and vertebrae. And then there was Dorudon serratus, which was actually found in Georgia and South Carolina, and is actually based on a partial premaxilla, teeth, cranial fragments, vertebrae, and some other non-described vertebrae that haven't been really assigned to Dorudon, but yet have been assigned. Well, they have been assigned to Dorudon, sorry, but they haven't been fully described yet. So both species were larger than their sister taxon, known as Saghestus and Zygorrhiza. which were two Dorudontidae, I guess you could call it, or Basilisaurid-like creatures that lived at the same time. Probably not in the same places, but were obviously really close related. And the reason that Dorudon differs as its own genus is from dentical and cranial morphology differences. And also, the problem with both species is that it is poor. The material of Dorudon serratus is actually quite poor, but from what they know, that Dorudon is definitely its own genus, and definitely the two species are definitely distinct from other Basilisaurid whale species. Now, Uhen, in his revision, actually placed both of them at around a similar size, though kept them as separate species due to dentical morphology differences between the two species. And so far, Dorudon serratus has actually been placed as the type species, even though it had its name fumbled about a bit in those many years that it wasn't considered Dorudon, though a lot of the actual genus description is actually based on the other species, Dorudon atrox. Now, Dorudon atrox actually allows for this distinction from Dorudon and other genera in the Basilisaurid family. Another thing to add, and this is important because it's based on the juveniles, but Dorudon juveniles have actually been found, and they also actually help distinguish Dorudon from the actual other Basilisaurid creatures. And talking about juveniles, there's actually something very special about them. A study was done in which they actually examined pathologies on the skulls of juvenile Dorudons, and what they actually found was that they were being attacked by large predators, and more specifically they were being attacked by Basilosaurus. Now, the reason is because they actually found a number of unhealed bites to the skull, which basically say that the bites actually killed these juvenile Dorudons, sadly. So they were killed off by the larger, more aggressive, more powerful Basilosaurus, who actually preyed on these animals. Now, Dorudon atrox has a dentition formula that is 3.1.4.2 over 3.1.4.3, and I don't know why they do this, but this is obviously due to like dentistry and dentition, obviously. But the teeth of Dorudon are actually quite unique amongst its family. Now, the cool thing about Dorudon is that they found incisors, but the incisors are actually quite rare, and they actually found them only on 2 specimens. But from the 2 specimens, they can tell you this: it has no denticles. The incisors have no denticles, the upper incisors. They're conical shaped, and also they have a single root. Now, there's only a bit of a fact about the upper canines, but the only thing of note is that they are larger than the incisors. Now, there's a lot of information on the premolars. The first upper premolar, is actually smaller than the other premolars and is conical in shape and actually has no denticles, so it's a lot like the actual incisors and canines, though the second upper premolar is the largest upper tooth in the top jaw, and it is double rooted. The third upper premolar is actually quite similar to the second upper premolar, though it actually has a strange projection on its lingual side that could actually be the remnant of a third tooth, so it could be that Dorudon's ancestors may have had a third root in that particular tooth. The fourth upper premolar is actually smaller than the third one, and also has a unique trait of having a fusion between the 2 roots at the tooth. Now, the molars are actually quite unique in Dorudon due to them being actually, extended to a zygomatic arc, and are actually smaller than the premolars and actually more rounded than the premolars. So this shows that they were more for crunching rather than actual slicing like the premolars. The lower incisors are actually a lot like the upper incisors because they're conical in shape and they actually align with the cheek teeth. The first lower incisor is the smallest tooth and sits on the anteriormost portion of the dentary, with the alveolus left open towards the mandibular symphysis, which also is basically just the mandible of the actual animal. And also the alveolus, which actually accompanies the tooth, is actually a lot closer to the alveolus of the second lower incisor. Now, the second and third lower incisor are basically like the lower canine as well, and that is that they are larger than the first lower incisor. Now, the premolars are a different story. So the lower premolars, the first one is actually single-rooted. The third one is the second largest cheek tooth, and the fourth one is the largest cheek tooth and is actually dominated by something called the central cusp. Now, they don't mention the second premolar, which is a bit weird, but I assume it's just like any other of the premolars in that it's just large and has a single root tooth. The molars on the lower jaw are actually quite weird in my opinion. The lower molars have denticles, but the denticles on the mesial edges are actually being replaced by the what is called the rentrant groove. I don't know what that is, but someone could probably evaluate that on that for me if they want in the comments. There's also a apical cusp that's actually seen in primitive protocoids, and basically this is actually a very primitive trait. Now, the second and third lower molars are very similar, though the third actually sits on basically an essential mandibular ramus, pretty much. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I wanted to give light on some whale species because I think whales are awesome. I mean, especially prehistoric whales. I mean, Dorudon is really cool. I mean, he's sort of like a badass dolphin in my opinion. Like, a more badass dolphin than dolphins badass, you know, badass dolphin. So, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I shall see you later. Bye bye.